Hello, everybody. Hi all, I think we've just got a few people joining at the moment, but once we're all in, I'm going to hand over to, first of all, I'd like to say welcome to the webinar today on purchasing a property in Australia. I think property in Australia is a little bit like a religion, real estate. So I think this is always a really interesting topic, and I know that there'll be plenty of takeaways from everybody that's on the webinar today. But I'm going to hand over now to Jess Groot, who will introduce our panel of speakers. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to pop it in the chat box. If you can remember to keep your microphones on mute. And just to let you know, we are recording the session and we will be sharing that at the end, later on today or early tomorrow morning. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Jess.
The grocery shops, what is it that our community, how is our community impacted? We brought in a space here.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Everyone's gone on mute now, so that's amazing, and we're ready to go. On behalf of the Australian Business Council Dubai and the Australian Business Group Abu Dhabi, we're delighted to have you all with us today. This is always one of the most popular discussions. I know Australians think about this topic all the time. Just a little bit of housekeeping to kick us off. Please remember to stay on mute. We've not done it from the central location so that people can all the speakers can talk, but please do stay on mute. Please pop the questions in the chat box as we go along. Please remember to keep your questions somewhat generic so that there's no personal information shared, remembering that this session today is going to be recorded. And without anything more in the admin, I'm going to go to the next slide. And I'm going to introduce, there's today's agenda. We've got lots of topics to get through. So the 10 topics plus a Q&A at the end. And we'll get to hear from everyone. First of all, we'll hear from Martin, and then we'll move to Michael and Richie. So we'll go one more slide and we will meet our panel for today. So Martin, who's going to kick us off today, is from Odin Mortgage. This is a really exciting specialist mortgage broker based in Hong Kong and Australia for Australian expats and overseas residents. So I love that they know exactly what they're talking about. If anybody is like me, you've tried to have a mortgage broker based in Australia that doesn't know how to deal with the nuances of being an international person or an expat person. So it's really wonderful to have him on the call. 6 years based in Hong Kong, but a very much a global background. And we were just reflecting on some memories, I suppose, of life in Sydney. So he definitely knows the ground that he's talking about. They do new mortgages and refinancing, and I'm sure he'll get into the details of everything that they offer. And then Michael and Richie from Milk Chocolate. I've been talking to them for many years now. It's exciting to see them back on the call. What I love about Milk Chocolate is the idea of a game plan. It's not just a one solution fits all. It's about purchasing, it's about construction, it's about property management, and it's tailored for you. So Michael's got a solid background now in this particular space in real estate, but also from advertising. And Milk Chocolate was formed over 5 years ago. Richie's got a long history in purchasing and renovating. I should have asked him more about the wine bar. I think it's Seedy. I don't know if I'm saying it right. The way it looked on paper might be different to the way I'm saying it. But what it said to me really when I was reading about the wine bar in Annandale in Sydney was that these two guys have the ability to spot a rough diamond, and that's really what you want when you think about their game plan idea of finding those places in the right spot where you can maximise your investment. So without further ado, welcome to today's session. Please keep your questions in the chat and we'll jump straight into it. Over to you, Martin.
All right, thanks, Lisa and Jess. And yeah, great to finally share the stage with you guys, Richie and Michael. I'll jump straight into it. So the first topic today will be a little bit of history, some Australian lending overview, right? So what's changed over the past couple of years? Well,
the 13 million is easy, isn't it? Like, and then
I'm not sure who's unmuted themselves or just jumped in. Yeah, so since 2015, it was actually quite easy for expats to get mortgages. You could rock up at a bank, talk to any broker, submit 2 or 3 pay slips and you'd be able to get a mortgage. So there was no need for overseas residence brokers. So for those of you who have been overseas for a while, that's probably what you're familiar with. Then in 2016, 2017, there was a lot of regulation that came in after the boom in the Australian property market. All the majors exited overseas lending. It was actually getting quite hard to borrow as an expat. Then policies between the banks actually varied quite a bit from 2018 to 2021. So every bank had their own individual policy. So if you went to one bank, they'll lend you 200K. You went to another one, they'll lend you 600. So it was actually quite hard to really determine how much you could borrow. Fast forward to 2022, with the sharp rate hikes and the economic uncertainty, we've seen that a lot of our expats are trying to get ahead of these rate hikes, get their living conditions sorted before the rates really get up to the 5, 6, 7% that people are expecting. So 6 months ago, what were we recommending to our clients? We were recommending fixed rates, 2.29% up to 3%, because we thought, hey, these rates are actually quite sharp, quite attractive. You can lock them in for 2-3 years. Everybody knew rate hikes were coming, but the ones who kind of listened and planned ahead were able to lock in these really attractive rates. For the past 6 months, they've been increasing fixed rates about once a month. So now if you look at these investment fixed rates charts, the fixed rate's actually 4% to 5%. So in a matter of 6 months, the interest rates went up about 2%. So now we're actually recommending variable rates to our clients. So one question that a lot of people like to ask us is, should we wait for rates to stabilize, or should we go and purchase something now? So from 2010 to 2021, rates were coming down. So the textbook says the prices of property should go up if the rates are going down. So the action was really go ahead, try to get in the market, try to get ahead of the boom that was coming. And if you did that, you probably saw your property prices go up quite a lot in this past 5 to 10 years. But in 2022 and onwards, rates are expected to go up. But what is going to happen to prices? Well, that's probably a question for the other 2 experts. I don't like to try and predict what happens to prices. Everybody thinks it's going down, but who knows, right? In the past, we've had interest rate hikes coupled with price increases. So my view is that as a pure investor, you probably want to take a bit of a wait and see approach. Whereas if you're purchasing a future home, you might still want to get ahead of the rate hikes. So why is that? So as a pure investor, you're probably quite focused on the cost base of the purchase, right? How much you're going to pay for it, and what the return's going to be over the next 5, 10 years. So what happens to the price is actually quite important to an investor. But be prepared for a scenario where the prices don't drop, your mortgage rates go up, and your leverage goes down, which is actually not the best for an investor. But if you're purchasing a family home, here's an opportunity for you to get ahead of the rate hikes. So while the interest rates at the moment are around 2%, you could probably borrow, let's say, $900K for a $1.2 million purchase, depending on your income, while the assessment rates, which is what the banks use to do the stress test, is low. When the rates go up to the 4 to 5% mark, the equivalent income would reduce the borrowing power to maybe 600K, meaning you would need more equity. Now, why is it actually more important for future homeowners to kind of get ahead? Well, it's probably because you're less interested in the price that you're paying relative to some other factors, such as where the neighborhood is, what the future lifestyle you want to have is when you move back to Australia. Do you want a nice pool, a barbecue? All these things, which are quite important to someone who's looking for a home, may not be possible if rates go up a lot and your borrowing power comes down. So less interested in pricing for homeowners. So it's still possible. 70% LVR is possible, but 90% LVR is quite hard to get these days. 30-year loan terms, interest-only options, cashing out, and self-employed are also able to get mortgages. So next section, why should you use an expat mortgage broker? Well, you could do everything yourself. So a lot of people also ask me this, can I just do financing myself? You could research study banks yourself, manage the whole application yourself, collect all the docs, find witnessing, execute everything yourself. At the end, you'll get rejected and you want to pull your own hair out yourself. right? Or you can come to someone like Odin Mortgage. We do the assessment for you, we guide you through the process, we manage all the parties, and we do this for free. So for those of you who do like to pull your own hair out, 3 tips. Number 1, research which banks will apply Australian tax rates at 30 to 40%, and which banks will apply your local tax rates, which I think is pretty much close to 0 in the UAE. Research which banks will lend 80% LVR and which ones will only do 70% for expats. And then finally, research which policies are relevant to your situation. So some banks will lend only to multinationals, some banks won't let you use bonus, some banks will allow you to equity cash out and refinance, whereas some will not. So those are 3 tips for those who want to go it alone. So why are those things important? Let's go through an example, right? So this is the wrong expat bank to go to. Let's say you earn 50K per month in the UAE. You will get hit with a 20% discount per month. So you're left with 40K. They whack on Australian tax, 28K left, rent expense of 15K, 13K left, living expenses of 9K, 4K after all these deductions is what the bank thinks your income is. So you're borrowing 250K. Now, anyone in the UAE knows this is not actual reality of what your cash flow looks like, right? So what should you do? You should get on an expat-friendly bank that does not take foreign currency discount. They realize that you don't pay any tax because you're in UAE. Rent expense and living expense are the same. So this is a truer reflection of your cash flow, and therefore you're probably able to borrow 4 to 5 times as much if you go to an expat-friendly bank. So how do you avoid settlement headaches, right? So how do you avoid settlement headaches when you buy a property? Pre-approvals, right? If you don't take away anything from my presentation today, take away this one thing, get a pre-approval. And I think Richie and Michael can back me up here later. So why should you get a pre-approval, right? They confirm how much you can borrow. They mitigate against a loss of deposit. They give you negotiating power. They're valid for 3 to 6 months, and they cost you nothing. So get a pre-approval, right? So what's the steps in getting a pre-approval? Well, the first step is come to the website, fill out some information, and then we'll provide you with a lender that's relevant to your situation. Upload some documents and submit your application. Your loan gets pre-approved, then you can start looking for a property. And then finally, when you find a property, you can sign the contract and you'll be guided by the guys at Milk Chocolate and your mortgage broker, your lawyers, on how you can actually settle on your property efficiently. So one strategy that I'd like to give, or a tip, is how to cash out equity from your existing properties to use as a down payment, right? So there's pros and cons of cashing out equity. The pros, you can unlock capital gains that are accrued on existing property. You can minimize your cash contribution from your current savings. You can potentially restructure unfavorable mortgages. So I know a lot of my expats, they got a mortgage 4 or 5 years ago and they were overpaying on their mortgage because the banks never told them a lower rate was possible. You get potential cashbacks. And then finally a con, which would be if you refinance your mortgage and you take out equity, actually you end up with high interest costs, larger repayments, and you could potentially be over leveraged. A lot of the times your tenor is also dragged out.
Oh,
I don't think someone's not muted, so yeah, awesome. Okay, so here's a case study. So how does a purchase work when it's funded by a cash out? So let's say you bought a property in 2015 for 600K, you took out an 80% mortgage. It's a 480K mortgage, LVR 80%. Fast forward to today, your property value has gone up to around 800K, you've paid down your loan to 400K, your LVR is around 50%. We then help you cash out equity of 240K to about an 80% LVR. So now you're able to take out 240K of equity that was held in the property. Then let's say you wanted to buy a $1 million property. Well, $1 million purchase price, you can get another 80% loan on the property, add some stamp duty to the purchase, and then you can use the 240K that you've cashed out of your existing property to purchase another one. So for a $1 million property, in this scenario, assuming you can afford the borrowing, you can actually purchase a brand new $1 million property with only a 10K Aussie dollar outlay. So that's how the strategy usually works for property investors. So this is probably one of the key questions that people have been asking me over the past 2 years, given the COVID environment, which is non-existent everywhere else in the world right now, except Hong Kong. So the common question is, should we buy now or buy when we get back? We're looking to move to Australia within the next 6 to 18 months. Well, as with all things in life, I think there's pros and cons to doing this. So I'll go through each of these in detail over the next few slides. But going through the pros, you're able to maximize your borrowing for a dream home. So usually people with dream homes, they're just able to take advantage of their situation as opposed to being super rich, right? So more efficient mortgage application is another pro, reduced relocation logistics and headaches, surprisingly. So I'll go through that. And then the cons are your reduced income when you go back to Australia, coupled with your higher repayments. You cannot immediately claim grants, and you need to commit before you settle down in Australia. So the first pro, expat incomes are able to maximize borrowing for a dream home, right? So as an expat in the UAE, usually you're on higher income, maybe 10 to 20% higher income. You have 2 years of stable bonus that you're able to use, and you have no income tax in the UAE. You can also claim rental income on your property. So all these things actually add to your borrowing power. Whereas in Australia, the situation is a bit more dire, right? Usually on lower income relative to an expat, maybe 10 to 20% lower. You have higher tax, up to 45% effective tax rates. You have to then consider, the HEX loans that you've been running away from, those come back into the picture, your Medicare levy and your 10% super. So adding all those things in, it really does make sense for an expat that wants to maximize their borrowing while they're overseas. So like I was saying, a lot of the times when you see these individuals with these nice fancy dream homes, it's not necessarily because they're a lot richer. It's mainly just because they are able to take advantage of their situation in certain circumstances. So buying as an expat, the next pro is it's actually a more efficient mortgage application, right? Because banks require around 3 months of pay slips. So if you move back to Australia and you're in a new job, the banks aren't going to lend to you because you don't have 3 months of steady employment. And if it's a new employer, it's an even worse situation, right? You can't use your bonus because when you move back to Australia in a new job, they'll say, hey, you haven't actually got bonus for the past 2 years. So therefore we can't use your bonus income. Whereas if you do it while you're overseas and you have 2 years of bonus to show, that can be quite good. They want to see stability in the role. So new job, no stability. And then the HEX and the super that I mentioned before. One flip side is probably that if you're in Australia, you can get a cheaper owner-occupier loan. But as an expat, you'd have to start with an investment loan and then flip it to an owner-occupier loan when you get back to Australia. And then the final pro is reduced relocation logistics. So these are some of the questions that you want to answer, right? How long do you want to be in accommodation limbo? So if you don't have a property to move back to when you're in Australia, where are you going to stay for the first 3 months? You're going to move once into the home or twice into a hotel, into an Airbnb, or with your parents. I was speaking to someone last month on a webinar, and they mentioned that they actually had to move 4 times when they were in Australia before they found a home. So that just seems quite chaotic. Now, how convenient is this limbo for work and school, right? Your kids have to commute to school. Are they going to commute from your parents, the rental property? How many routes do they have to learn? Is it even convenient for your work either? Will you like your new team? So for example, you move to a new company and after 3 months you decide, hey, this job is not for me, then you're in limbo for another 3 months. And then finally, are you comfortable buying the property without seeing it, right? So here you can leverage on your friends and family, or you can consider a buyer's agents or the lovely guys over at Milk Chocolate to help you source a property. So what about the cons? Reduced income after repatriation and higher repayments. So yes, you can borrow more, but should you? So I don't recommend anybody to borrow and live beyond their means. So please think about what your incomes are going to be like in Australia. Play around with our repayment calculator to actually see if you can manage these repayments when you go back to Australia. shame you have to pay higher tax, HEX, your income gets reduced, all those factors. Another con, you cannot immediately claim grants. So stamp duty rebates, usually these are only relevant for anything up below 700K. First homeowner grants, you probably won't be able to get these either as an expat investor, but you can always claim these again in the future. And then finally, I think the key takeaway for this is that it's generally not relevant for expats and more expensive purchases anyway, and they will usually be foregone. Final one is you need to commit before settling down in Australia. So the risk is you buy something you have never physically seen, and you've never actually done an inspection yourself, right? So the mitigants are start the process early and don't FOMO in. Buy in areas that you're familiar with and understand. Leverage on friends and family, and consider using a buyer's agent or some of these experts like Rich and Michael. So I'll run through one case study before I wrap it up. Family of 4 came to us in Hong Kong, and they had secured a role in Perth, and they wanted to buy before repatriating to Australia. So what does that look like? Well, before repatriation as an expat, they came owed a mortgage, and we pre-approved them for a $1.5 million loan at about 2.8% at an expat-friendly bank. They then engaged a buyer's agent, for example, like Milk Chocolate, or experts like Milk Chocolate, and they listed out what they were interested in. They wanted a 4-bedroom home for their 2 kids. They wanted to be near the beach. They wanted to have a swimming pool, and they wanted to be near the primary school that they wanted their kids to attend. And that was the brief that they passed over to the property experts. 6 months later, they moved back to Australia, and we swapped their mortgage to an owner-occupier loan, which was actually much cheaper at 2.49%. Obviously, these rates are significantly different today, but this is what we were able to do in terms of structuring the application for them. So I'll be wrapping it up here before I pass over to the guys from Milk Chocolate. So these are my final 4 tips for anyone that's looking to invest in Australia or move back in the next year or 2. So number 1, use an expat mortgage broker if you're based overseas. You can use a local broker, but what you're going to find is a lot of the policies they don't really understand because this is not their bread and butter. Get a pre-approval to avoid headaches. Leverage on your expat status and earning power to consider getting ahead of these rate hikes. And finally, review your existing mortgages and properties for cost savings and your cash out potential. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up my section, and I'll be passing over to Richie or Michael to go over the property section.
Awesome, thank you, Martin. I'll just share my screen. Great, fantastic, guys. Well, firstly, just want to thank everyone again for joining today. My name is Michael, and I'm one of the co-founders of Milk Chocolate. And this is Richie, my other co-founder. So thanks for attending. So guys, over the next 30 minutes, Richie and I are going to do a quick rundown on exactly what we do at Milk Chocolate, the team that does it, the all-important data and how we use it, and then tackle some of the hotter topics on everyone's mind at the moment, such as around the ground of what's happening in the Australian property market, factors that we think could and will affect the market, where we see prices heading, but also really importantly, where we're going to spend the most time is on 7 case studies that we want to share with people. So obviously the disclaimer, any advice given throughout our presentation is strictly advice of a general nature. But before we kick off, we just want to do a quick rundown on our team and the data sets. And this is really just to validate the talking points that we're going to go through in our presentation. So as I mentioned, at Milk Chocolate, we help our clients plan, buy, build, and manage Australian property. So we're a complete offering encompassing research, planning, buying, building, and management. And our property team is composed of economists, valuers, qualified property investment advisors, data scientists, real estate agents, builders, project managers, interior architects, interior designers, and property managers, just to name a few.
Just while Michael catches his breath, guys, as he did mention to preface, the narratives and discussion points relating to the market conditions and projections we're about to present have been provided by a wider team, in particular the data and analytics team. So what we do use, guys, is we have a combination of about over 2,000 data points, which has been sourced for every suburb, region and city in Australia, which is dating back to 1980. We've acquired that data through CoreLogic, the country's largest source of real estate data, PropTrack, a division of REA, ABS, RBA, Google Maps, to name a few as well. So the data includes a range of micro and macroeconomic indicators such as income, unemployment, inflation, population, for instance. And from a micro point of view, looking at vacancy rates, housing affordability, rental information, medium sales price per bedroom per suburb, for instance. So what we actually do with that and what that actually means is we underpin that utilizing our in-house machine learning capabilities. So that essentially means we source, clean, interpret, and provide projections by modeling trillions of permutations at any point in time. So in practical terms, we've trained a tool that washes the data dating back to 1980 that learns and scores cities and suburb potential future value. So we think we've got a pretty good handle on what's happening at the moment in the market.
Awesome, guys. So just to give you a quick around the grounds on each of the major markets as our data analytics team and on-ground purchasing teams are currently.
Michael, you've gone on mute.
Sorry, guys. I'm sorry about that, guys. So just doing a quick around the grounds on a state-by-state basis. So essentially, as our data analytics and purchasing teams see it, if we go in a clockwise direction, starting at the top there, we see Darwin as approaching the peak of the market, taking going in a clockwise direction and looking at Southeast Queensland. So we're certainly seeing the Sunshine Coast, Brisbane and the Gold Coast still in rising markets, but that rate of growth is certainly starting to slow. Sydney certainly now moving into a declining market, Canberra approaching the peak of the market, Melbourne moving into a declining market. And if we look at some of those regional areas around Melbourne, such as Ballarat and Geelong, certainly approaching the peak of the market. Hobart approaching the peak of the market. Adelaide is still a little resilient at the moment and still is in a rising market. And Perth just approaching the peak of the market also. And just quickly to have a look at the East Coast, which typically people are fairly interested in. Brisbane undoubtedly is still the country's hottest real estate market at the moment, but we are seeing, as I mentioned, that rate of growth slowing. So we are seeing multiple opens now, as opposed to open homes that were so multiple opens as opposed to homes that were selling after the first open. Lower open home attendance as well, and just a reduction in the crazy cash unconditional offers that were dominating the market between October 2020 and early 2022, so early this year. So it's now feasible to remain competitive with purchasing conditions. As an example, we were often competing with buyers in this market who were from Melbourne. They were making offers sight unseen, cash without any conditions, and this is now becoming non-existent again. In Melbourne and Sydney, we have now had a few months of negative growth, and much like Brisbane, we are seeing longer days on the market, lower auction clearance rates and stock levels starting to slow. In the last month, the market has been slowing down. Melbourne recorded 0.7% decline in May 2022 and Sydney a 1% decline. And it's now likely, as we know, that these two major capital cities have passed and are nearing the peak of the current cycle. But in saying that too, to add to the above, we are seeing high quality A-grade assets that follow the real estate fundamentals still achieving significant premiums in all of those markets.
Cool, thank you, Michael. So I suppose, guys, probably the biggest question that's on everyone's lips is what does the remainder of 2022 look like and beyond? And there's a couple of key influencing factors that we look at and that what we believe will sort of dictate what's going to happen in the market, definitely in the next couple of years. And that's the three items that you can see on the screen. So the RBA lifting the cash rate, how is that going to impact the market? Population changes. So Australia has been closed up until February this year. So we are now open for business, and the impact of population growth back into Australia will impact the property market. And also the cost of construction, which I'm sure you're aware of, has skyrocketed. So to start off, guys, just talking about the cash rate, it's key to sort of understand the fundamentals of that as well. So as we do know that the rate has lifted, so it's currently sitting at 0.85%, which has come off its record lows at 0.2%, where it was sitting for a significant period of time recently. So it was always only going to go in one direction. And that was being forecast for a series of hikes furthermore in 2022, and to what we believe will be more of a normalised pre-pandemic level. So the RBA is essentially going to take more of a watch and act rate on the rates, and also what's happening in the wider economy to determine what its next moves are. What we do know is that CBA is currently forecasting for the end of the year for the cash rate to be about circa 1.35%. And by the end of 2023, they expect it to normalise around 1.6%. So generally what we do know is lenders to create a consumer rate will add about 3 to 3.5% on top of the cash rate. So therefore, based on that as a worst case scenario at the end of 2023, we'd assume that we should be normalising around 5%. So that is in line with our senior economist and what he's expecting around the normalisation around the rates at 5%. However, you do need to have conversations with your licensed mortgage broker around your personal circumstances as well, because that rate can change depending on your circumstance. What we also do know, and Martin did touch on this, was just that the way that APRA's intervened since 2017, 2018, adding additional 3% serviceability on any current mortgage rates to essentially help underpin the market, so to reduce the fact of mortgage distress is key with regards to that. And nor are we looking at any 105% LVRs anymore, which was common pre-GFC time. So hopefully what we're going to see is the limited amount of sales via mortgage stress, but it's not to say that that won't happen. And it is a key factor for us as Milk Chocolate when we're reviewing market conditions from a micro and a macro point of view. We are looking at the housing affordability of those areas that we're purchasing properties in to make sure that the average homeowner in those particular markets can afford interest rate rises. Because we have looked historically when we've monitored that, and our machine learning team has looked at that as well. And we do know that when the average household income is more than 40% of a mortgage, then we'd start to see mortgage distress sales. So it's really important to monitor that. And to make sure that we're sitting beneath that threshold. And we also do know, guys, that the interest rate hikes don't affect everyone. So first homeowners can be a little bit more spooked and fearful of an interest rate hike. Less fearful are seasoned investors, but also the types of investors. So an investor who's looking at a passive income scenario or a game plan where they're looking to focus on a positively geared portfolio, interest rate hikes are going to be a detriment to them, but not so if you've got a negatively geared portfolio. And owner-occupiers are generally going to be purchasing a home based on their current situation. So it is important to focus on that. When we do look historically, when we look at influencing factors of capital growth in terms of its peaks and troughs, it doesn't have such an impact in the long term. It's more so the initial shock of it. So that's really key to understand. Moving on to population changes. So Australia's population growth is about 1.7%. So that's in comparison to the US and NZ, which is about 0.7%. So really, really strong. Before the pandemic, it was about 250,000 migrants settling in Australia each year. And that's now previously to February, that did drop down to virtually zero. So traditionally, most overseas migrants will choose to settle in either Sydney or Melbourne because they're both considered global cities. And we're expected to see those two cities experience the increased population over the next 12 to 24 months. And we think it will take about 2 years to reach those pre-pandemic levels, about 250,000 people per year. So why that's important to understand is when we're looking at population growth and the effect of that, pre-COVID levels and obviously post-COVID levels now, Southeast Queensland had the highest interstate rate migration rates, and that is obviously accentuated during and post-COVID, and that's due to lifestyle and affordabilities mainly. Victoria and New South Wales really had a high level of interstate migration. So that is a lot of people leaving those particular states and generally moving to Queensland, again, because of affordability and lifestyle drivers and also retirement as well. So what is offsetting the people leaving to the sunnier shores of Queensland is obviously the overseas migration. So we do expect that to play a little bit of a role in terms of how it's going to underpin the property market in the next couple of years. So it will be interesting to see how that does play out. But what we do think will be probably one of the biggest factors is the cost of building at the moment. So ABS and HBA have just announced to the extent of what these building cost increases have been. So about 45 to 50% on materials and 35 to 40% for labour since March 2020, which is pre-pandemic. So that has been the cost increase across construction over that period of time. And we're definitely seeing the impact of that, and more so with the recent weather conditions in Australia. $6 billion of insurance claims have been made in the last 24 months, with the recent flooding making up $3.8 billion of that. So that's also coinciding with additional strain on materials and labour, especially in southeast Queensland and the northern rivers of New South Wales. So So what that essentially means, guys, is we're starting to see first homeowners gravitating to established housing as opposed to previously where they were focusing in some instances, in some markets, on purchasing land and building on that particular land, so house and land packages. This is creating additional demand for upward pressure on established housing, so giving in some instances, they are financially going to be better off to buy an established home as opposed to building a home given the cost of construction. So this is not in all instances and not in all markets, but when you look at Western Sydney, for instance, and some of the outer suburbs of Melbourne, and also in regional markets in Queensland, where house and land packages is a strong market for first homeowners, it's now more affordable for them to be purchasing established home, which is putting pressure on that established pricing, which is also another driver for long-term capital growth. So there's so many influences, both positive and negative, that's going to affect the market, and it's a really interesting time. But they're three of the key fundamentals for us to be watching over the next 12 to 24 months. Just moving on to the next page, guys, we have detailed a lot about the location and market trends, but it's really, really important to put an emphasis on the real estate fundamentals and also the asset selection. So by way of comparison, Milk Chocolate, we place 70% on the growth influences to the location identification, whilst about 30% is placed on the asset selection. So we just wanted to take you guys through just some 4 of the key fundamentals that we look for when we're purchasing a home, and it's really good to understand this from a buyer's agent's point of view. First and foremost, orientation. So pretty simple, and north-facing rear is very much desirable. Australians functionally like to live in the rear of the home, where generally you're seeing your kitchen, living, alfresco dining zones. Ultimately, you want to have as much sunlight or natural light in those particular areas of the home. Whereas if you can consider a south-facing rear, especially in the cooler states such as Melbourne, Victoria, in the ACT, if you had a south-facing rear in your living areas to the rear of the home, it's very much undesirable. And also the flow-on effects to that is the fact that there's a lot of mold and damp, which can be created because of that. So first and foremost, you want to be focusing on a north-facing rear aspect. The high side of the street's really, really important. The block topography is really, really important as well. So ideally looking for a flat block as opposed to a sloping block. If it's a sloping block, there's considerations around the maintenance of that home. Is there adequate drainage for that property, retainer walls, etc. Is it on a main road or a thoroughfare road versus a quiet residential street makes a significant difference, and there's quite a significant variation in median price points when you're looking at houses in the same suburb that are on a main road in comparison to a house that's in a quiet residential street. For investment purposes, from a location point of view, ideally we want to be within a 20-minute walk or about 2 to 2.5 k's of public transport, shops and local amenities within the suburb. Moving on to the options, guys, this is really, really key for us, and it really does help underpin the value of your particular asset that you're purchasing. And this is a family home or an investment property. So key to the Milk Chocolate asset is the options available. So adding value by increasing the spec of the home, by adding extra floor space, adding bedrooms and bathrooms, building additional structures, such as granny flats or subdividing to build multiple dwellings, are all options that we look for as a business when we're purchasing a home. Irrespective of executing on these, the asset is underpinned by the opportunities provided, and the asset will remain. Then the asset will maintain and maximise a ceiling for growth in the future. So what that essentially means is that irrespective if you take advantage of those opportunities, the home with those options is always going to have a buyer that can potentially take advantage of that, which if you do go to sell that home, they're going to be paying a premium to take advantage of those particular options. And also if you're holding that property for the long term, whilst the market or when the market potentially does cool, you can still manufacture equity by taking advantage of some of those opportunities as well. So very, very key to a sustained long-term growth of your asset and your portfolio overall. And it also just opens up the size of your buying pool. So when you're selling that particular property, because you're opening up to potentially developers, builders, as well as family home buyers and investors as well. And then if you are having a property with an option where you have added additional dwellings to the asset, it gives you options in the future to sell. So you can either sell all of those assets that you've created, hold one, sell one, hold both, live in one, rent the other. It just provides flexibility because everyone's situation can change and does change. So it's important to have those options up your sleeve, which is key. Moving on to the character, Again, very much key for us. We'll generally target homes that present with character. So older homes will not only retain a lot of their original charm, but they're also generally built to a high quality standard and tend to perform better from a resale perspective. More attractive to family home buyers. So they will generally be purchasing with their heart as opposed to their head. So the character home that it looks beautiful on the street, has that beautiful curbside appeal, is going to generally attract an emotional price point, which is going to add value to your particular asset when you're selling. They're bigger bones, they're well apportioned, which is certainly a key driver for better functional living, and attractive rental demand. So what I mean by that is high ceilings, wide hallways, generous sized bedrooms. They're all key fundamentals of an older style home. So I'm talking Queenslanders, California bungalows, Edwardians, etc. And character is something that can't be reproduced, and that as they become the minority, the value increases given the difficulty of that to reproduce. So very, very important to understand that, guys, is that the character is hard to reproduce. And so that is becoming more in demand and people want to have that particular asset. And then just finally, guys, quality. So just do your checks, team. So building and pest reports, electrical safety reports, invasive plumbing inspection, structural engineer checks, understanding what's the difference between step cracking and external walls versus vertical lines. One of those does mean that there's potentially issues with the foundations, which is going to cost thousands and thousands of dollars in the future to fix. Beware of the home handyman renovation. So although it's a nice to have a renovated home, it's important to make sure that that home has been renovated by a professional, and you can do your checks on the builders through doing your DA checks as well. Stormwater, a simple one. So your gutters and stormwater, making sure that's connected to your drainage and not draining to the subfloor underneath the house, because ultimately over time that is going to create dampness under your home, which if it's on footings, it's going to potentially start to lean. Those foundations will start to dissipate. If it's a sloping block, is there adequate drainage or retaining walls to protect the foundation of the home? All of these checks, guys, can save thousands of dollars in unnecessary maintenance costs, and a good quality asset will allow you to channel those funds as opposed to into those costs into more aesthetic improvements, which is going to add much more value than maintenance improvements. So they're just a couple of things that we look for from a real estate fundamental.
Awesome. Thank you. So now, guys, what we're going to do is run you through 7 case studies that just show a variety of different sort of purchases and scenarios. So the first here is what we call the buy and hold. So this home was purchased for clients living in Doha roughly 12 months ago, and it's in Redcliffe, which is about a 35 to 60-minute drive to the Brisbane CBD, depending on what time of day, of course, it is, and also accessible to the Brisbane CBD by train from the newly built train station there. And so Redcliffe is what we consider a secondary location to a major CBD. So it's a commutable distance. However, it does offer more affordability. Now, with this particular home, the previous owners had undertaken a really tasteful and practical renovation, and the home was tenant ready. So our client's brief was to a home that just needed absolutely no work and that would be low maintenance. And as we can see from the current appraisal of $800,000, the area has become very popular for families that are being priced out of Brisbane, and we do forecast this to continue. So just a good sort of example of a home that was purchased not needing sort of any further work, and it is just a nice sort of set and forget investment.
The next one, guys, is a subdivision in Adelaide. So I did see someone's comment come through saying go Radelaide, so you'll potentially love this. So this was a part of a game plan that we put together for a client who are based in Singapore. This was purchase number 2 of 4 to date. It really is a poster child of a home with plenty of options that Milk Chocolate aspires to purchasing. So it has the ability to cosmetically improve the home. We can structurally extend the home, and we can also subdivide and build 2 brand new dwellings, or keep the existing dwelling and build a brand new dwelling to the rear. So as you can see by the character of this home, it's definitely a character-filled home. It's dependent, and it talks to the character of the particular suburb that it's in as well. And the option here that we took for the guys was to execute on the structural extension of the home whilst leaving the opportunity to subdivide in the future still available. So basically what we did is we manufactured the extension to go to a point where we knew that the subdivision would still be able to be taking place, but wouldn't eradicate the need for us to remediate any of the works that we've done with this structural extension. So if we go to the next page, and we've just got here just the original floor plan and then the completed floor plan. So this renovation has been completed. So We essentially retained the character at the front of the home. We went from a 4-bed, 1-bath, 1 living in what was a dysfunctional home to more of a functional 4-bed, 2.5-bath, 2 living room abode with a rear dining and al fresco zone. So a couple of key things to point out here, which is quite cool. So the car space that you can see on the right-hand side towards the bottom, that's been aligned with the butler's pantry entry into the kitchen. So obviously very, very useful because there was a driveway down the side already. So it allows the tenant of the property to be able to park underneath in cover. If they're being shopping, allows them to go straight from the car into the butler's pantry, dump the shopping bags into the butler's, and then go into the home through that avenue. We've closed off the second living zone. So you can see there's 2 living zones. So it's really, really important if you've got a 4-bedroom home to have 2 living zones, especially if you've got kids and parents who want either a quiet or a loud zone where you're going to be watching sport, or a quiet zone where you just want to sit and read, for instance. So that's really important. 2 bathrooms side by side was done to basically reduce the plumbing costs and functionality. So having them side by side reduced the cost of the renovation works. We also have the laundry with a separate WC. And from a functional point of view, this is really important to understand. So if you've got kids playing out in the backyard, we ideally don't want them to come through the dining, living room, kitchen zone. We can have them going through the laundry into the WC, and also for your guests as well. It allows them to use the WC as opposed to using the main bathrooms at the front of the home. They are frosted glassed doors, so we're still letting light through, but obviously plenty of privacy, which is really, really important. So and that coinciding with the 2 dining zones. So the al fresco zone outside, which has got strip heating, external fans, etc., which can be used for all year round. Plus also you got your indoor dining zone as well. So a really, really neat renovation where we've added floor space. And as you see on the next page with regards to the pictures, the extension, when we're looking at the before, during and afters, you can see the extension is actually not that significant. But the value that we created from this renovation was quite extreme, but because it was coupled with creating a more functional home, which is really, really important. You can see the importance placed on functionality in terms of how that's reciprocated with the value of the home. And also the spec and the finish was designed and proposed to suit the changing area demographic and the needs. So this location is about 2.5 k's from the Adelaide CBD. It was more of an industrial zone 10, 15 years ago, and it is gentrifying where the younger demographic and younger professionals are moving to this particular part of Adelaide because the south, the inner east and inner north is becoming quite unaffordable, but they are desiring and demanding high-end finishes, and which is the reason why we went down this path. So a really, really neat project for this particular client, and it's now just been leased as well.
Yeah, so the next is what we call a buy and add. Sorry. So
the next case study is what we call a buy and add a granny flat. So this for this client, their particular game plan, or the game plan for this purchase, was a dual income property for cash flow and yield. So our clients are expats living in China, and we purchased this home for them off market in February 2021. It's located in an area of Canberra that will see substantial growth in the short, medium and long term, and it is also really popular with granny flat accommodation. So the home is also zoned for subdivision as well, and it has the ability, obviously, through that to build a granny flat to the rear. And so currently valued at $875,000. The granny flat build would at the moment be about $210,000. So that would produce all up a yield of 4.76%. So currently the main home is renting for $595 a week, and the granny flat should get between $400 and $450. So again, a really good strategy for cash flow and for higher yields as well.
Sorry guys, the next one is a subdivision in Brisbane. So this is a project as part of a client's game plan as well. It's the first purchase in their plan, and their plan is geared towards capital appreciation and equity generation. They're Aussie expats based in Kenya. And as you can see from a numbers point of view, the purchase was at 1.056 million. So it was in more of a blue chip location on the south side of the river in Brisbane. And the project cost, which is a total cost, which is inclusive of architects, council fees, management fees, construction, etc., pools, sitting just shy of 1.7 for the blue chip duplex construction and project. Timings is about 18 to 24 months, and the current appraisal for each dwelling is 1.5 million each in today's market, but we do expect on completion for that to be a little bit higher as well. So Again, given the location, the proposition was a mid to high end finish for this particular duplex, given its proximity to the CBD and also the types of buyers and demographic in the area. It is a boutique 2-story duplex development with plunge pools and a 250 square metre internal footprint. If we just jump onto the next page, we'll see that the floor plan that we're proposed here is, this is your 2 stories, so your lower and upper floor plan. So a couple of key points to point out here. We kept a bedroom and ensuite downstairs by the entry, and this is really to appeal to the intergenerational living and also downsizers, plus also provides options for teenagers retreats or guest bedrooms as well. The remainder of the bedrooms have been placed upstairs. The inclusion of the atrium is really, really smart. Given it's a duplex, there is a common wall without any windows. So the atrium that sits in between those 2 dwellings is basically manufacturing light that otherwise wouldn't be there. The lower floor and upper floor wet areas, we've aligned to reduce the plumbing expenses again. So when you're looking at doing renovations, take into account where your plumbing services are, especially if it's a 2-story construction. You can see that we've aligned our bathroom upstairs with the kitchen below, and also the ensuite and laundry upstairs with the ensuite upstairs, downstairs as well. So that's really key to understand. And also the study nook by the kitchen, perfect for parents to oversee the kids' homework and what they are and potentially not looking at on the internet. And also obviously just the open plan kitchen, dining and living zone overlooking the plunge pool is a bit of a feature. So it's packing plenty of punch. It's definitely going to be a beautiful completed duplex in this particular market. And the little plunge pool is a nice addition. It is hot basically all year round in Brisbane, so very much desirable as well.
Awesome. And the next one, guys, is what we call the bolt hole. So we have a number of clients that are looking for what we call bolt holes, where they can call Australia home for part of the year. So lots of our expat clients have been out of Australia for 12, 13, 14 or 15 years and might, have another house somewhere else around the world as well. And so we purchased this 1940s built apartment in Elwood in Melbourne for a client. And the apartment offers loads of character internally and externally. And there's only 5 in the block. So when we're looking for apartments, we're looking for really boutique blocks. And so 5 is perfect. And this particular apartment also has a really large courtyard on title. It's almost a bit backyard-like, which is very rare for the area. It's close to shops, transport, restaurants and cafes. So really accessible to all of the amenities, and it's easily rentable on the long-term and short-term rental markets. So when our client won't be in Australia, there's those options. And although an apartment, it still does come with options for structural renovations in the future or cosmetic renovations, or as it is existingly, or nothing at all, just with the standard sort of upkeep and maintenance that's required for a home.
The next one, guys, is just a family home purchase. So this was for an expat client based in Dubai, and it was for a family home purchase in Sydney. Their determining influences for the location was the lower North Shore in Sydney, as this is where their family and friends were based and the area that they grew up in. They did have a bit of a tight budget for this particular market. So what we had to do was work with our data and analytics team who completed a full market analysis, taking into consideration a couple of those key items that you can see on the right-hand side of that drop-down list. So items such as private and government schools, school bus routes, parks, amenities, infrastructure were key as well for this particular purchase. This client was particularly patient. It was a project that took 10 months from basically engagement through to settlement of that particular property. We had to navigate the extraordinary market conditions in Sydney as well during that point in time, whilst also managing their emotional requirements and needs as well. In the end, we ended up purchasing this property under auction conditions for what we believe was below market value. In this instance, patience was the best plan for the trying market conditions. And I suppose it's just important to note a lot of our buyers, in particular investors, but also family home purchasers, only 3% of our clients have viewed a property. So the process that we take, the journey that we take them on, the information that we provide is very much providing the relevant trust and information that's required for them to execute on the purchase, which is important to note as well.
Cool, guys, and I know we're very nearing the end. So just another quick one. So a holiday home purchase in Western Australia. So clients come to us for lots of different purchases, and our particular client in this instance is an Australian expat living in Egypt, and they came to us to find their dream holiday home in WA. So we purchased this home in the Dunsborough region of Western Australia. It is a master built home that's on 2.01 hectares, and essentially there's nothing to do. Alternatively, there is sort of further scope in the future, which they're working with us on at the moment, which Richie will quickly talk through.
Yeah, so at the moment, guys, we're just working with the additional 2 studios to this particular asset. So it isn't on a significant piece of land, and the ability to add 2 studios, one which would be used on the short-term market potentially, and the other one would be used for a study from a work from home perspective. So some really nice options and opportunities for this particular client, which is again something that we're always looking for. And then just finally, guys, just on this page is just an illustration of the game plans that we provide our clients. So you can see on the left-hand side, what we essentially do is create those bespoke game plans based on our clients' goals and personal circumstances. So in this particular instance, we presented 3 options, basically to illustrate the varying degrees of risk and outcomes. And they range from conservative all the way through to more aggressive options. You can see that the client has the ability to toggle across those key indicators, which will be more relevant for them. So looking at the equity position of each of those plans, the income, total asset position, holding costs. So whatever is important for them, they can see how each scenario performs against each other. The middle screen just shows you an example. So this client, so the client that we just touched on for the property, the holiday home, they have purchased, plus we have also purchased just their family home in Floreat in WA as well. And next year in 2023, we are looking at the next purchase for their plan, which is a 700k investment property in Queensland, which has an 80k cosmetic renovation attached to that. So the goal for this particular client was ultimately passive income, working towards 120k and a total ROI of 145% in the future. So this client has the ability to compare their forecasted game plan versus the actuals as well. So performing quite well at the moment for this particular client. They are expats living overseas in Egypt, but they're originally from WA, hence why those purchases were made for them there.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much, guys. So look, that brings to the end, and I know we're really running out of time. So we really appreciate everyone hanging in. But again, we just wanted to thank everyone for your time. We do really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules, and we hope you got something out of today. If you're thinking of purchasing or in the process of purchasing, looking to undertake a renovation project, or even looking to lease an existing home, we offer a complimentary 30-minute session with a milk chocolate subject matter expert. So that's be it anyone across our data research and analytics team, purchasing settlements and due diligence team, construction and design team, or property management. So so the guys will send out a Calendly link that you can book sort of a 30-minute slot to have a talk with one of those subject matter experts. So thank you very much again for your time. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Amazing. Lots to see there. I love those case study analysis from both groups. That was really, really helpful, I think, and makes it a little bit more tangible for everyone to understand. I've had 4 questions come in via email, so I'll quickly get through those first, and then I'll go to the questions in the chat, and hopefully they'll give everyone a chance to put their questions in the chat that are live. So the first question is from an Australian citizen, but their spouse is not. Is it better to purchase a property in their name, so in the Australian citizen's name? Martin, I think this one would be for you.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, if you're an Australian citizen and you have a partner that's a foreigner or not an Australian citizen, it's usually better to purchase the property just in the Aussie citizen's name, because that way you can reduce the costs and the stamp duty and the taxes of investing or buying a property in Australia. So if the Australian citizen has strong income and can purchase it in their name alone, that is probably the better option. But if you need the income of the foreign citizen, then you can definitely add them onto the application, but it just becomes a little bit more expensive.
Okay, the next one's reasonably specific, but how can I get a mortgage in Australia if I'm not employed and my husband's the sole income earner with an income coming from the US?
Yep, so we definitely have lenders that will lend to foreign citizens that are overseas. So yeah, no issues with that one.
That's pretty straightforward. How long do we need to work in Australia to get a mortgage? I know you were touching base on the timeline earlier, Martin. If my partner is on a partner visa, can we get a joint mortgage?
Yep, so look, all these scenarios, usually the answer is yes, but you just have to know which bank to go to. So I forgot the first part of that question was, how long do you have to be in Australia? Yep. So usually banks require about 3 months of pay slips, so about 3 months.
Okay. And if I get a mortgage in Australia on my UAE income but move home, how long would the mortgage remain valid?
Yeah, so look, the correct answer here is that once you change jobs or change cities, the application is no longer valid because your personal circumstances have changed. So if you got a $1 million pre-approval while you're overseas and you're expecting that pre-approval to last when you move back to Australia, that's not going to work because they're going to ask you for updated pay slips when you actually go to settle on the property.
Okay, clear. Moving into the chat. Can you comment on the recent removal of the GCT main residence exemption for foreign residents? Does anyone want to dive into that?
We're just obviously absolutely advice of a general nature. We're not licensed accountants, so you really do have to talk to your accountant about that. But what it does do is you did get, I believe it was for 6 years, that you could still claim your home after you left, and if you sold it within 6 years, you did get the capital gains discount or no capital gains tax. So it does change that, but that is really dependent on everyone's sort of individual circumstances, and you really need to just consult with a licensed cross-border tax accountant on that.
Awesome. Go Radelaide. I'm an Adelaide girl myself, so go Radelaide. Is there seasonal fluctuations that are also playing a role? I think this speaks to Richie, the parts that you put together for us, such as lower volumes over the winter months, etc.
Yeah, it's always the case. Winter is generally a slower period of time from a real estate point of view. So it is playing a part, and we're coming off unseasonal highs though as well. So in different markets react differently, but at the moment that is also part and parcel of what's happening. There is reduced supply as people are preparing to sell their properties in the warmer months such as spring.
Awesome. And just to confirm, Michael, Milk Chocolate is actually based in Australia, right? But you guys normally visit quite often. We just haven't seen you during COVID, I think.
Yeah, that's correct. So we are based in Australia. I was actually coming up very, very regularly, but because of the pandemic, haven't travelled since March 2020. But we're looking to certainly start those now that the borders are open again.
Amazing. Okay, I think there's a personal message for Martin in the chat. I'll leave that one in there and you can check it out later. If there is not a significant capital gains hike if purchasing while overseas, or is there a way to set up a loan purchase that it's not the case?
No, so there's no way of avoiding CGT. You have to. I'm not sure if you wanted to jump in on that, Martin. But again, absolutely important to talk to a licensed tax accountant. You can purchase homes in trust vehicles, which give different tax rates and so forth. But they can get into complex structures that really need to be talked about with people like Martin and licensed accountants. But otherwise, there's no way to avoid a CGT event or a capital gains tax.
Yeah, so maybe just a little bit more to add. So again, same disclaimer, talk to your accountants because they're the best position to tell you what the correct answer is. But generally speaking, you don't want to sell as an expat because then immediately you're hit with the 30% capital gains tax on the first dollar that you gain on the property, right? But if you buy this property and you only sell it when you move back to Australia, and you technically move into the home, there are pro rata benefits of selling the property when you are an Australian tax-paying resident, because then you can also use the capital gains buffers that you can potentially get as a resident. But generally speaking, as an expat, you just don't want to sell anything from a tax perspective. Yeah.
Clear. Is there an instrument you can add to an Australian mortgage to hedge against currency fluctuations if you're funding the mortgage with income in a foreign currency?
Yeah, so generally speaking, the banks, the Aussie banks will not offer any of these products, and it would be something you have to independently source. So a few ideas for you is if you were financially savvy enough, you can actually go onto the market and let's say go to Interactive Brokers or IG Markets and start looking at some of these more exotic derivatives to hedge against currency fluctuations yourself, not provided by the bank. But a lot of the times people ask this question because they think that they need to make their mortgage repayments in AUD, but they're earning income from overseas. But if you rent out this property, don't forget that your rental income is actually denominated in Australian dollars, right? So your rental income usually covers the mortgage repayments, give or take plus or minus 10%. And that plus or minus 10%, usually you just make a lump sum repayment back to Australia, maybe once every half a year. And that should be more than enough to cover the delta.
Okay, amazing. Milk Chocolate, somebody's going to reach out to you with their personal circumstance. They're excited and heading home soon and looking for, I guess, a cross family situation. A question about we spoke about the markets around Australia, and about if you could just add maybe, Richie, about why Perth is being viewed as a peaking market despite only just opening, I guess, opening due to COVID. Is this their point?
Yeah, the Perth market's an interesting market. It's a market that's generally driven by one economic driver, which is the coal and mining industries. So that is a key reason why that market peaks and troughs the way it showed signs of growth coming off the back of the borders opening up and even prior to that. However, it's not a market that we'll generally invest into. The purchases that we have made in Perth are basically off the back of family home or holiday home purchases, but it's driven by one economic driver, which is not enough for us to consider because it's too unstable from that point of view. But it's a market that we are watching like every other capital city around Australia. And if those things start to change and we see different drivers providing different inputs for growth in the future, then we'll start to look at that. But at this point in time, it's something that we're not considering.
Makes sense. There's a self-employed member here in the UAE. Will there be limited lenders or significantly increased interest rates? Martin, I guess that one's for you. So their profile is self-employed while they're here in the UAE.
Yep. So yeah, definitely you will have limited lenders. So usually the big banks do not like to lend to self-employed because they don't understand the overseas environment. How does the tax system work? How does bookkeeping work? Those questions are generally outside the appetite. Well, those situations are generally outside the appetite of the Australian banks. So usually you have to go to things called non-bank lenders. These non-bank lenders are fully regulated in Australia and fully licensed. So those would be the options for self-employed. Now, the interest rates and the fees are slightly more expensive, but those are usually the guys that will lend to you as a self-employed. What they require are 2 years of positive financials and probably like an accountant's letter to sign off on any unique items that arise on your balance sheet. And you have to have just a track record of that business producing cash flows, just like if you were a salaried employee. They don't like shell companies. They don't like, obviously, gray area companies either.
Okie doke. Just some thanks. I think there's a few people wanting to connect. Don't forget Michael's offer of that 30-minute session, and there'll be a link sent out. So I think many of you who have put something in the chat will be able to reach out and use that session to see how to continue the conversation. Just a question about the Melbourne market. Is there a dip expected in the Melbourne market? And very cheeky, I love a good cheeky Aussie question asking about which suburbs to look out for.
Yeah. You'd have to sign up with our services and we can tell you. But with regards to Melbourne, it's a good question. It's one that we're monitoring. So Melbourne has performed, I suppose, to the inferior of Sydney. So generally Melbourne follows the traits of Sydney and vice versa. But the extended lockdowns and the 8 lockdowns over COVID has really affected the housing market growth over the last 2 years. And we have seen it pull back sooner than we had initially thought. Overseas migration, in particular into Melbourne, is one of the significant drivers for capital growth in that particular market. So it's definitely a market that we're going to be watching over the next 12 to 24 months to see how that performs. But like anything, if you're buying in a good quality area, buying the right assets, you're going to be holding that particular asset for the long term. It's a market that you should be considering for purchasing, and also depending on what your budget is, will dictate what areas you can be purchasing in within that particular market.
Amazing. If you already own a property which is being paid off and are interested in purchasing a new property to live in when you return, can you take out equity in the original property to be used in the new purchase, which will then allow you to negative gear the original property and have no mortgage on the new purchase? Mouthful. Probably you, Martin.
Yeah. So look, Odin Mortgage can do anything. So come to us and we'll figure out a solution for you. But the quick answer is yes, we can do that. Banks will allow you to take equity out of your property for investments and for purchasing homes. But usually you have to provide some sort of evidence. So you can't tell them, yes, I plan to buy a home, and they sign up on it and they give you all the cash, and then you go take that cash and go gambling, right? They would require a contract for you to get the cash. So they will approve your loan, but they actually won't give you the cash until you show them a signed contract.
Clear. Okay, and we'll probably have this as the last question. With the already increased interest rate forecasts and further increase, will the house prices in Sydney come down within the next year? In this case, should we wait until the price reduction?
That's a pretty common question. Yeah, we are definitely from CoreLogic's most recent data, the Sydney housing market is retracting, and we're entering negative growth territory. When you're looking at from a 12-month annual rolling average, it's still in positive territory, but it's definitely cooling. So from our point of view, it was expected. It was always a heated market, and it was not something that could be continued into the future based on the strength and the growth of that particular market. So we do expect it to retract. What we do know historically with regards to the Sydney housing growth, since 1992, it has only retracted 5 times over that period of time. And the actual time period that it's actually in negative growth territory is less than half of the time that it's in positive growth territory. So if it does retract, we do believe it will only be for a short period of time before buyers and investors get back into that market.
Amazing. Great questions. Looking at the time now, I think everybody, that's just over the hour that we originally planned. Martin, perhaps if you've got any closing comments you'd like to make, and then I'll hand over to Michael and Richie for closing comments from Milk Chocolate.
Yeah, sounds good. So thanks everyone for joining, and thanks Jess and Lisa for hosting everyone. I think a lot of people just ask, what are the next steps, right? So from an Odin Mortgage perspective, look, simply jump onto our website and fill out a quick 2 to 5 minute questionnaire. Provide us with your financial information, and we are able to come back to you with an assessment that's relevant for your expat status. No fees included. Everything is done for you upfront from the mortgage side of things. You can get a pre-approval, and you don't even have to use it until you find a property. So our service is completely free from the mortgage side of things.
Sorry, just take myself off mute. But look, just would love to just to thank everyone as well for attending. Thanks to Lisa, Anissa, and Jess as well, just for hosting. And please do, we'll get that Calendly link out, and please do just feel free to book in a sort of no obligation 30-minute session with one of our subject matter experts that can, help answer any of your questions in more detail. Cool.
Amazing.
Richie?
Richie?
Just a big thank you from me, that's all. Thank you everyone for taking the time, and sorry we have run over time, and we appreciate that.
I love it. I love all the extra content. That's amazing. So on behalf of OzBG, thank you to everyone. I'm going to hand over to Lisa to close our session out today, but yet another great lunchtime session. So thanks for your time today. Over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, and thanks, Jess, too. You're the master of the questions. I'm well impressed in how you managed to keep tabs on them. Thanks, Martin, Michael, and Richie. Honestly, it's an amazing amount of insight, and I'm sure there's lots more questions that will be coming. We'll be sharing the recording and the slides with you afterwards, and also to obviously the contact details for Martin and the team at Odin, and Michael and Richie and the team at Milk Chocolate, and that Calendly link that Michael's been referring to. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to seeing you out and about at something soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys.